Imagine a boy, born into modest poverty, who would one day pull the financial strings of an entire continent.
It was you. You orchestrated this entire cover-up from the beginning.
A man so feared, so secretive, and so brilliant.
You are the one responsible for this travesty. I demand the truth from you right now.
He came to be known only as the Wizard of Wall Street. Jay Gould didn't inherit power. He didn't marry into money. He forged his empire through sheer force of intellect and an unapologetic love of control. In an era when business was still looked down upon by nobility, Gould rose through its ranks with the cold precision of a general and the subtlety of a chess master. Others made fortunes. Gould made warfare, quietly, secretively, relentlessly. He wasn't always successful. He teetered on the brink of bankruptcy. But when Gould returned to the field, he didn't rebuild. He dominated. But where did it all begin? Before the railroads, before Wall Street, there was a boy, a plan, and a hunger that never left him. There are boys who fear the dark. And then there was Jay Gould, who stared into a masked mob at age 10 and told his father to shoot.
Now, there are men who flinch at firelight, and boys who command it. Jay Gould didn't learn fear that night. He learned something colder. That intimidation didn't require action, only readiness.
Delaware County, 1846. The anti-rent war rages across upstate New York. Farmers disguised in native dress storm estates demanding rent be abolished. One night, the disguised men arrive at the Gould family tannery. Torches lit, voices raised. Inside, young Jay stands at the window, calm as winter frost.
His father couldn't pull the trigger, Jay didn't have to, and still the mob dispersed. He was 10, but already he'd grasped the arithmetic of fear, the leverage of silence, the weight of a stare.
In the years that followed, the tannery business collapsed. His father, once a proud man, broke under debt and disgrace. But Jay wasn't shattered. He saw opportunity in the wreckage. At breakfast one morning, he simply rose from the table and said one word, "Goodbye." He never returned.
To understand Gould, you must first understand the silence of his departure. No farewell embrace, no promise to return. He offered history not to preserve the past, but to position himself within it.
Before Wall Street, before railroads, there was the boy who studied men like terrain and moved through it like a ghost. He would never belong to a place again, only to ambition. He left with a 10-cent coin and returned with a map that made him $5,000. A $50 from a stranger changed his life, but hunger changed him even more. This isn't a story about luck. It's a story about a boy who refused to starve, even if he had to invent a job that didn't exist. By 1852, the tin shop felt too small for Jay Gould. He sold his share and accepted a new job as assistant to a man mapping Ulster County for just $20 a month. He packed no suitcase, left his savings in the store, and took only enough money to buy a one-way ticket. He was chasing an opportunity, but it didn't chase back. Within days, Gould was broke, hungry, alone. He refused to spend his last dime. By 3 p.m., he hadn't eaten in 18 hours, and then a farmer ran out in front of him.
He didn't cry over hunger. He cried because failure was inefficient. He wasn't sentimental, he was rather strategic, and he just discovered that farmers would pay to watch the sun move. You give Jay Gould a shadow, he'll sell you the clock.
The noon mark became a side hustle. Soon, Gould was making enough to fund the entire survey. By winter's end, he walked away with $6 in profit and a full map of Ulster County. But the real profit was the lesson. Never depend on a man who's failed 3 times. depend on yourself. With $500 in hand, Gould moved fast. He mapped Albany, Delaware, Cohoes, then parts of Michigan and Ohio. His accuracy caught the attention of Albany's elite, even spurring an attempt to have him commissioned by the legislature. They declined, but Gould didn't. While sick in bed, he wrote an entire history of Delaware County, 400 pages long. It was fact-driven, carefully written, a work of obsessive detail. But when those books were published, the world made one thing clear. It said, by Jay Gould.
Yes, Gould. Even in ink, the world got him wrong. A boy reshaping futures, but still mistaken for someone else. How fitting. He could endure with starvation, but a typo? Unforgivable. It was more than a typo. It was a prophecy, a whisper that a man they misnamed would one day become the name everyone feared and followed. He boxed up every copy and sent them back to the printer. It wasn't pride, it was control. That book wasn't just his name, it was his math. And Gould never let math lie.
By now, Gould had $5,000 in capital. His map business stretched across states. Even a lawsuit from his first failed boss couldn't slow him down, because the lawyer he hired to dismiss the case would one day be his personal judge in a railway scandal. By 1856, Jay Gould was sharpening his pencils under the roof of Charles Loop, one of the city's more respected leather magnates, a mentor in trade, a gatekeeper to fortune, and a man teetering unknowingly on the edge.
So we have seen men who run businesses, and we also have seen men who are their businesses. Charles was the latter. His name stitched into every deal, every ledger, as if permanence could shield him from any sort of risk. And then came Gould, not yet a tycoon, just a boy, with a sharpened quill and eyes that memorized everything. He watched, he learned, and he calculated the fall before it even began.
Then came the collapse. Loop's investments buckled. Gould, barely out of his teens, stayed silent as his mentor unraveled.
Loop was already drowning, stretched thin between aging leather contracts and fading credit. But Gould, he moved like a shadow with a pen, offering quotes, making deals, mapping partnerships, all in Loop's name, but without Loop's word. It wasn't betrayal. It was initiative. The kind of initiative that terrifies men who can no longer keep pace with it. And so, Charles Loop didn't just lose his business, he lost his authority, his grip, and finally, his will to remain in a world that no longer recognized him. Some say Loop died from the market, but no, he died from betrayal. Not by Gould, but by the world he trusted. He loaded a pistol, sat in the quiet of his home, and let the Simons take him. A revolver's echo replaced a life once loud with ambition.
And just as the pages of one chapter closed, another began to stir.
And then, in the midst of ruin, a glance. She was a daughter of wealth, a portrait of quaint elegance. He was ambition in boots, their eyes met, a single moment, 1,000 consequences yet to follow.
He came to the city with no plan, no capital, and no allies. Just a hunger so sharp it made failure feel like a mild inconvenience. New York didn't know about it yet, but something cold and calculating had just checked in. By day, he studied strangers on the sidewalk. By night, he stared out a hotel window, until the city finally blinked first. Fresh off the collapse of his tannery ventures, Gould checked into the Everett House Hotel and wandered the streets of Lower Manhattan. Window shopping ambition.
Now imagine showing up to New York. Broke, friendless, and unemployed and still thinking, yeah, I'll own this place someday. That's not optimism, that's Gouldism.
And then he saw her, not in a ballroom or a business meeting, but through a window. Her name was Helen Miller, the daughter of a wealthy grocer, and Jay Gould fell fast.
A meet cute through the window, if he walks, still in glances, and then a secret marriage. I guess when you're broke and out of options, love becomes the best stock to invest in.
When Helen's father objected to the courtship, the couple took matters into their own hands. No drama, no scandal. Just a quiet walk to a minister's house and vows exchanged behind closed doors. To Gould's surprise, her father didn't retaliate. In fact, he handed Gould his first railroad, the Rutland and Washington Railroad, a 62-mile stretch of rusted dreams between Troy, New York, and Rutland, Vermont. Abandoned after the Panic of 1857, its first mortgage bonds were selling for 10 cents on the dollar. Gould pounced.
10 cents on the dollar for a guy with barely a dollar. Some people buy fixer-upper homes. Gould bought an entire railroad on clearance.
He became president, treasurer, and superintendent, sometimes all in the same week. He lived on the line, studied operations, and drove traffic up. Then came the Rensselaer and Saratoga consolidation, and suddenly those worthless bonds turned golden. Gould cashed out. Depending on who you ask, he walked away with anywhere between $30,000 and $750,000.
30 grand, $750,000. Look, when Gould's involved, every number has quotation marks around it.
As the Civil War erupted, Gould found himself in the perfect position. He wasn't fighting on the battlefield, he was playing the markets. He speculated in railway stocks, he gambled in gold. And somehow, he almost always won.
While generals read war updates in the newspaper, Gould had private sources whispering from the front lines. He wasn't betting on war, he was profiting off its timing.
By now, Wall Street had taken notice. Gould set up shop with a firm, Smith, Gould, and Martin, and began mastering the real game, railroad manipulation. He didn't drink, he didn't party, he just worked and watched.
He was a guy at the poker table who never spoke, never blinked, and somehow always knew what cards you had. They once asked him if speculation was just glorified gambling. Gould shrugged and said, "Your minister, doctor, and barber all speculate. If you stop it, you'll promote gambling." Translation: don't hit the player or the game.
It was a long way from the barefoot boy in Roxbury chasing hens in the hay. Now, every railroad, every stock, every gamble was a battlefield, and Gould was at war every single day.
So he found his corner, not of a room, but of the entire railroad industry. And he never let go.
The titans of the era would come to know his name, some as allies, most as enemies. Drew, Fisk, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, and Morgan. Many would burn out, blow up, or vanish into ruin. But not Gould. In early 1868, Cornelius Vanderbilt thought he had cornered Erie stock. He hadn't. Because behind the scenes, Daniel Drew had engineered a financial ambush. And Jay Gould, he was already laying tracks into political corruption deep enough to swallow New York whole. Despite a court injunction forbidding new shares, Drew, Gould, and Fisk simply printed more Erie stock, 50,000 shares worth. They dumped them onto the market overnight. Vanderbilt was left holding overpriced stock and no control of the company. And while he scrambled for legal retribution,
Be advised, we intend to pursue the maximum legal retribution as allowed by these agreements. You'll find that avenue is closed to you.
the Erie directors made a midnight escape across the river to New Jersey.
Well, it's hard to overstate the audacity here. They weren't just running from the law, they rewrote it. Gould and Fisk had Erie reincorporated in New Jersey while simultaneously lobbying New York to legalize counterfeit shares they'd already issued. One newspaper called it an attempt to legalize counterfeit money. I'd say that's being generous.
The the New York legislature hesitated, not because of ethics, but price. Vanderbilt was still buying influence.
Take this. I want you to silence the only one who couldn't be outmaneuvered. And get me the Erie.
So were the Erie men. It became a contest of corruption. Who could buy the bigger vote? To tilt the scale, Jay Gould took a quiet trip to Albany, with $500,000 in Erie funds, in cash, tucked into his pocket.
He claimed he was going to Ohio. Instead, he slipped into Albany, got himself arrested, made bail, fell conveniently ill, then showed up to work every day at the Capitol. One official called him a runaway. Another just called him effective.
Cash changed hands like poker chips. One senator took $75,000 from Erie and $100,000 from Vanderbilt. Gould paid another man $5,000 just to smooth him over. In 1869, a state committee investigated. Gould, under oath, admitted to vast political payments. He had no memory of specifics, just rubber accounts, flexible enough to absorb $1 million in bribes and campaign funds.
In a Republican district, I was a Republican. In a Democratic district, I was a Democrat. In a doubtful district, I was doubtful.
That quote should be carved in stone. Gould wasn't a politician. He was a chameleon. Whatever color the money wore, blue or red, he matched it.
But the truth was darker than mere election rigging. Gould confessed to paying off both state senators and members of Congress across 4 states: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio. To him, these were just districts on a railroad map. By the end of 1868, a temporary peace settled in. Vanderbilt was paid off and bowed out.
Lifeline. Take the money, walk away, and get out of the business league for good. You don't decide when I'm finished.
Drew cashed in and resigned. The lawsuits faded. Injunctions were lifted. Gould and Fisk took full command of Erie, and while Drew may have believed the lemon had been squeezed dry, Gould knew better. There was still juice left, and he was thirsty.
By the time Gould was ousted in 1872, Erie's debt had ballooned to over $115 million. Not a penny went into improving the railroad. It was a Ponzi scheme in slow motion, funded by passengers, shareholders, and taxpayers who didn't even know they were investors.
As Gould gutted Erie, his allies, like William Boss Tweed, were doing the same to New York City. And just like the Erie books, the city ledgers were full of legal lies. Eventually, Tweed's empire collapsed. He died in disgrace. But Gould, he walked away untouched and unimaginably rich.
For Tweed, corruption was a crime. For Gould, it was plain and simple, a business strategy.
And business was booming. The Erie War was ending, but it wouldn't go quietly. Inside the Grand Opera House, 2 rival groups locked themselves into separate rooms, each fearing arrest, each too stubborn to surrender. Blue-coated officers filled every spare chair, table, and patch of floor. Jay Gould's enemies had outmaneuvered him. Out of desperation, he proposed arbitration by Horace Greeley, a man who loathed him.
A massive pump and dump scheme, defrauding thousands of investors. I didn't authorize the trade.
Gould's play wasn't diplomacy, it was theater. The man who raided the Erie like a pirate now stood on deck, waving a white flag made of newspaper headlines. But Greeley didn't buy the act, and neither did the public. One night was all it took. Gould surrendered. Erie was pried from his fingers, but the damage, that lingered for decades.
The once mighty railroad remained crippled, smothered under debts and liabilities. It would not pay a dividend until 1891. And the trail of destruction Gould left behind was staggering. Gould abrogated valuable railroad leases for personal gain. He created shell companies, funded by Erie, owned by himself and his allies. Even Judge Barnard received shares, slipped to him like hush money.
It wasn't just theft, it was innovation. Gould didn't rob the company, he redesigned it into a private treasury that paid out whenever he pleased. Rather like what you modern folks call an ATM, but without the card limit. And when the storm rolled in, he didn't just dodge justice, he traded on it.
When Erie tried to assess the missing funds, their own auditor, Giovanni Pertinax Morosini, refused to cooperate. He defected to Gould, becoming his shadow, his secretary, and his shield. By then, Gould had moved on to cornering Northwestern stock, a coup that sent share prices rocketing from $70 to $250. Among those crushed? Henry N. Smith, Gould's old partner turned bitter rival.
The sum we lost in Northwestern stock has gone to Gould's pocket.
The books of Smith, Gould, and Martin was still in Smith's possession, and in those ledgers lay the bullets Erie needed. Forgery, bond conversions, over $12 million rerouted from company vaults to Gould's own coffers. And so, they had him, arrested, indicted, on the ropes. But Jay Gould never just paid for a crime. He invested in it.
He turned restitution into a market strategy. When leaks suggested he would repay Erie, stock surged. Then came the denials. Stock crashed. Gould bought low, sold high.
Each rumor was another trade, each denial another win. By the time he made his restitution, the con was complete. He handed over buildings, expired stock, and $1 million of United States Express shares that didn't even exist. A theatrical gesture, a legal cleanse, and in the fine print, Gould stipulated that this act was not an admission of guilt.
When Hugh Jewett took over as receiver, he realized the restitution was smoke and mirrors. Assets were fake, some encumbered, many worthless.
And so ended Gould's reign over Erie. Not with handcuffs, but with handshakes. He left behind wreckage, lawsuits, and a hollowed-out railroad, and yet he walked free, ready for his next masterpiece, the gold market.
When gold hit its lowest price in 3 years, Jay Gould saw a moment. Not for the market, but for history. A moment to seize the federal supply of gold and rig it like a private roulette wheel.
He didn't just want to corner gold. Gould wanted to corner America's decision-making. Not just Wall Street, but the Treasury, the banks, the press, and yes, even the president.
Gould began quietly. $7 million in gold, bought just above 130. He spiked the price to 140, dragged in other speculators, and watched it dance upward. As president of Erie and head of a national bank, Gould wasn't trading gold. He was manufacturing demand. But there was one threat he couldn't outwit: the U.S. government.
Every gambler fears the house, and in gold, the house was the Treasury. If Secretary Boutwell dumped Federal Reserves, the whole scheme would collapse. So they decided to infiltrate the dealer and fix the deck.
The cabal needed a man inside the sub-treasury. First, they approached a man named Robert Catherwood, Corbin's stepson-in-law.
They told me I'd make a great deal of money. In a perfectly legitimate manner.
Catherwood declined, said his idea of legitimate didn't match theirs.
So they found someone whose definition of a legitimate was more flexible.
Then enters General Butterfield. Corbin secured his appointment. Gould handed him $1 million in gold, and soon the sub-treasury was fixed.
But this wasn't just about buying influence, it was about building illusions. They needed the illusion of policy stability, the illusion of neutrality, and above all, the illusion that the President of the United States was not being manipulated.
In June, President Grant visited New York. Corbin hosted him. Gould came to pay respects. Fisk took him to the theater, and then to sea.
A war hero, a sitting president, now seated in a private theater box of Wall Street's most notorious gambler. You would call it a charm, I call it containment.
They tried to probe his stance. What would Grant do if the Treasury moved to sell? The president answered bluntly.
Well, there's a certain amount of fictitiousness about the prosperity of the country, and the bubble might as well be tapped in one way as another.
That one line felt like a funeral bell.
It hit gold like a wet blanket, because if Grant popped the bubble, the whole operation burned. So they made their final pivot. If the president can't be persuaded, he will have to be removed.
In August, Fisk sailed to Newport, where President Grant vacationed. He carried a letter from Gould, claiming over 300 ships were stranded at sea, grain rotting in their hulls, and that only high gold prices could save the American farmers.
The message was dire. If gold stayed cheap, the dollar stayed strong. Too strong for foreign markets to afford American wheat. Buyers would walk away. Farmers back home would drown in unsold harvest. The export economy would seize up. The solution, they claimed: let gold rise, let the dollar weaken. Only then could American crops move and disaster be averted. It wasn't just a message, it was a trap. Fisk posed as a patriot, warning of economic collapse, but every word was bait, crafted to keep Grant from selling federal gold so the cabal could hoard it freely.
It sounded patriotic, even wise, but it was one hell of a trap. Gould didn't care about wheat or farmers. He just needed Grant's silence to keep the Treasury gold locked away.
And when charm wasn't enough, they surrounded the president. Detectives, operatives, concerned voices in every corner. He would walk the street and hear the same tune from strangers, merchants, and generals, all part of the cabal. If everyone says it, it must be true, right?
Fresh loaf, sir. Wheat has been moving rather slowly this season, and merchants say the foreign buyers aren't taking as much. It has been difficult for the Western growers.
By September 1st, Gould believed Grant had been boxed in. He bought another $1.5 million in gold, this time for Corbin. Every player was in position, every lever pulled, and all that remained was to make sure the president didn't change his mind.
And so the United States government, the Treasury, the executive, and its gold were slowly wound into a mechanism that served the ambitions of two railroad men in rented tuxedos. Gould didn't rig the system. He built his own.
Before Black Friday meant flash sales and doorbusters. It meant betrayal, manipulation, and the near collapse of America's economy. In September of 1869, a secret cabal cornered the gold market, and they did it by deceiving the President of the United States. The final stage of the conspiracy was simple and vicious. President Grant was lured to a quiet, obscure town in Pennsylvania, Little Washington, under the pretense of visiting an old friend. The town had no telegraph access, no easy transportation. He was, for all practical purposes, isolated. Then came the surge. As soon as Grant was out of reach, Gould began aggressively buying gold. Others in the pool panicked and sold. But Gould, he doubled down. He used his own bank, 10th National, to over-certify millions in checks. Garfield would later call it a manufactory of certified checks. Gould had 50 to 60 brokers buying non-stop. $60 million in gold changed hands. Prices shot from $135.5 to $140.5.
What Gould did here wasn't trading. It was state-sanctioned looting, disguised as patriotism. They parked the president in the countryside like he was grandma's dog on fireworks night, just so they could torch the economy in peace. And Fisk? He wasn't interested in markets and morals. He smelled corruption like a bloodhound and couldn't wait to dive into the filth. This wasn't a strategy, this was performance fraud, starring a gold-crazed peddler and a financier with the conscience of a stone.
Rumors swirled that the government itself was backing the gold rise. The bears shorted gold, but Gould kept pressing forward, driving prices and pressure upward. Wall Street was convulsing. Then came Friday. The Black Friday. Gould got nervous. And when men like Gould get nervous, they don't retreat, they escalate. So he tried one last move. A letter, pushed through Corbin, and rushed by horseback straight to the president. Grant read it, took his time, and said just 2 words. All right. That was enough. Back in Wall Street, the wire lit up. All right. Now to Gould. That sounded like approval. A green light. A signal to keep going. In his mind, even the president was in on the game.
Butterfield is all right. Corbin's got Butterfield, and Corbin's got Grant fixed all right.
But to Grant, it meant message received, nothing more. And then, the detail that changed everything. The president thought the messenger was a clerk from the local post office, but it wasn't. He'd ridden miles just to place that letter in the president's hands. That's when it clicked. Not a market reacting, but a market being cornered. When Grant finally realized the trap, he acted. That night, Grant didn't issue a proclamation, didn't move the Treasury, didn't make a sound. He did something far more precise. He had a letter written, not to Wall Street, but to Corbin's own house. No threats, no drama. Just a message. Step away, now. Do not indulge with the conspirators. And with that, the entire illusion collapsed under its own weight. Orders went out to sell gold. And the market collapsed like a punctured lung. In the aftermath, Fisk told Congress a story. A dramatic, foaming-at-the-mouth confrontation with Corbin. He claimed he barged into Corbin's home, called him a coward, and demanded answers. The truth? It never happened. Corbin denied it. So did the timeline. Fisk wasn't even there.
Leave it to Fisk to fabricate a Shakespearean monologue about betrayal, and then swear it under oath. The man didn't just lie, he auditioned for history.
Gould, meanwhile, said little. He'd already secured his position. Contracts fulfilled, money protected. He let Fisk take the spotlight and the heat. One broker, Belden, was thrown to the wolves. Fisk denied responsibility. Gould stayed silent. The Erie legal team flooded the courts with injunctions, blocking lawsuits and freezing settlements. Within a week, Wall Street limped back to life. But hundreds were ruined, dozens of brokers wiped out, and the conspirators? Corbin was snubbed by President Grant and vanished. General Butterfield quietly resigned without inquiry. Speculation went cold for months, but Gould and Fisk, they kept their power, they kept Erie, and somehow they kept their reputations intact.
Black Friday didn't destroy Gould, it made him. The system didn't collapse, it blinked, then handed him the keys.
In a single week, 2 men corrupted the markets, deceived the White House, and exposed just how fragile America's financial system really was. This wasn't just the first Black Friday. It was the first time Wall Street was deliberately weaponized, and it wouldn't be the last.
By now, Gould had become 2 men. One was the builder of empires, 10,000 miles of track, entire economies forged from nothing. The other was a chess player, sacrificing pawn companies, manipulating courts, spiking and suppressing stocks at will. And Wall Street, it finally started calling his bluff.
He had risen from a tanner's apprentice to a titan of industry, only to build his empire atop suspicion, litigation, and revolt. Jay Gould didn't just play the market, he reprogrammed it.
And yet, it's not over. For every victory he claimed, the fractures widened. Wall Street was no longer afraid of him. The question now wasn't what Gould would take next, but how long he could hold on to what he already owned.
He began as a nobody, a boy from Roxbury who carried surveyor chains through the dirt. But by the time Wall Street looked up, Jay Gould had already rigged the rails, broken the banks, and left a trail of bodies in his wake. He played one tycoon against another. He seduced courts, corrupted legislatures, and held the gold supply hostage. He didn't just outsmart the system, he became the system. From Lope's demise to the betrayal of Boss Tweed, from Black Friday's collapse to the courtroom humiliation of Judge Gresham, every line Jay Gould crossed, he did it with a smile and a plan. But as Gould climbs higher, so do the stakes, because the next war won't be waged on railroads. It'll be fought in power, in politics, and in the very soul of the American economy. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just history. It's a blueprint for power. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell, because Part 2 will take you to places Wall Street hoped you'd never see.